in the earliest hours of a cold wartime morning, when fog still clung to the German forests like a heavy shroud and the distant hum of factories echoed across silent valleys, a secret that would one day shake the entire world of aviation was unfolding behind. Reinforced steel doors in a facility so classified that even high-ranking officers knew nothing of its existence. And as the world outside fought brutal battles in the air and on the ground, deep inside this hidden enclave, a group of German scientists huddled over something so radical, so technologically impossible for its time, that even the engineers who designed the Messerschmitt 262 and the V2 rockets would have been stunned into disbelief. For what lay on the hangar floor was not just another experimental aircraft, but a machine that looked as if it had fallen straight out of the next half-century. A sleek, predatory, impossibly advanced aircraft with sweeping curves, blended wings, a cockpit that resembled the canopy of a spacecraft, and internal systems that no nation in the 1940s could even describe, let alone build. And yet here, under flickering industrial lights, the impossible had been crafted by men who refused to accept the limits of their own era. And as the lead scientist and aviation visionary, whose name would be erased from official archives, ran his hand across the smooth, composite-like skin of the prototype, he whispered that this machine would win the war before it even touched the sky, because it was not just decades ahead of contemporary aircraft, but an entire technological dimension beyond anything the Allies or Axis could imagine. A plane capable of outrunning fighters that hadn't been invented yet, capable of striking targets across continents with power plants that defied physics as it was understood in the 1940s, incapable of flight profiles that modern stealth aircraft designers would only begin to study nearly 50 years later. And yet, despite the breathtaking brilliance of the machine, despite the brilliance of the minds behind it, despite the enormous resources poured into it, the aircraft would never fly, not even once. And its story, buried under layers of secrecy, sabotage, fear, and political betrayal, would become one of the most shocking, tragic, and mysterious failures in the history of aviation. So as you watch this video, stay with me, because the deeper we go, the darker this story becomes, and the truth behind why this plane never left the ground is far more sinister, far more suspenseful, and far more extraordinary than anyone has been allowed to know. For its fate was sealed not by physics or engineering, but by human fear, political paranoia, and a chain of events so chilling that even now, nearly a century later, experts argue about what really happened in that hidden hangar, and whether the machine that promised to change the future of flight was destroyed because it was too advanced, or because it worked too well, and threatened people in power who could not afford to let it succeed. And so our story begins at the very moment the hangar doors opened for the first public demonstration, a demonstration that would end in catastrophe. Betrayal and secrecy so intense that every document, every blueprint, and every surviving witness vanished into the shadows of history, setting the stage for one of the greatest what-ifs of World War II aviation, and one of the most suspenseful mysteries ever locked behind government archives. And as the technicians moved into position, each one sworn to silence under threat of immediate imprisonment, a faint tremor spread through the floor as auxiliary generators kicked in, feeding power into systems that no aircraft of the 1940s had any business possessing, humming with an otherworldly resonance that made even experienced engineers exchange uneasy glances. Because deep inside the sleek fuselage of this impossible craft were components so advanced controlled gyros, adaptive airflow regulators, and an energy system that historians still argue about that it felt less like a wartime prototype and more like something reverse-engineered from a future humanity had not yet reached. And as the lead scientist adjusted his wireframe glasses and signaled for the final checks, everyone present felt the tangible weight of history pressing in around them. For they knew they were standing in front of a machine that could rewrite the entire war. A machine that could outrun radar, outmaneuver physics, and operate at speeds and altitudes that even today seem implausible. And yet beneath the awe was an undercurrent of nervous tension, because in the shadows of the hangar, high-ranking officers and political agents watched closely, whispering among themselves. calculating the implications of such power being placed into the hands of mere engineers. And when the order was finally given to power the aircraft's revolutionary propulsion system and engine so advanced that it blurred the line between jet, rocket, and something else entirely, the lights in the facility flickered. Dust trembled from rafters, and a low-frequency vibration rippled through the air like a warning from the future, growing louder, stronger, stranger, until every loose bolt and every sheet of metal hummed in sympathetic resonance. And for a moment, just a moment, it seemed that the plane might actually lift itself off the ground without moving an inch, as if gravity itself was unsure how to interact with this unfamiliar creation. But then, just as awe peaked into breathless anticipation, something shifted, something tiny, almost imperceptible, a fluctuation in the power matrix, a momentary spike in energy flow, a whisper of instability, and several officers exchanged alarmed glances, because whatever powered this aircraft was not behaving like any propulsion system they understood. And before the demonstration could continue, a stern, cold command cut through the hangar, halting everything. Delivered by a political official whose authority outranked even the engineers who had dedicated years to building this machine. And with that single command, the experiment was suspended, the aircraft powered down. The scientists ordered away from their own creation. And in that moment, the fate of the plane began to shift from triumph toward tragedy, from promise toward paranoia, because the men in power did not see innovation, they saw threat. They saw unpredictability. They saw a machine far beyond their control. And as internal divisions grew between brilliant scientists, desperate to push the boundaries of aviation, and fearful political actors determined to maintain absolute control, sabotage, secrecy, and internal conflict quietly tightened around the project like a noose, ensuring that this aircraft, this marvel 50 years ahead of its time, would never be allowed to leave the ground. Even though every engineer who touched it swore that if given just one chance, it would have shattered every record, every assumption, every limit of its era, becoming the most revolutionary aircraft in history. And yet, even as the political order froze the project under layers of rigid bureaucracy, the lead scientist refused to surrender, for he believed with absolute certainty that the aircraft represented not only the future of warfare, but the future of human flight itself. And so, under the cover of darkness, and with a handful of trusted engineers, he resumed testing in secret, poring over datasheets, adjusting internal components, and refining the prototype with a level of precision that bordered on obsession, driven by a sense of duty and destiny that transcended wartime necessity, because he knew what the aircraft could become if only it were given the opportunity to prove itself. But each passing day drew more unwanted attention from political agents who viewed his persistence as insubordination. And the more he pushed, the more they tightened their grip, until one night the situation reached a boiling point. When an unexpected visitor arrived at the hangar, a high-ranking officer whose reputation was one of ruthless efficiency, a man known for erasing projects, people, and ideas that threatened the delicate balance of power within the regime, and with a cold, deliberate gaze, he walked the length of the aircraft, inspecting its futuristic contours with an expression that revealed neither admiration nor curiosity, but something far more dangerous: fear. The fear of something he could neither predict nor control. And when he turned to the scientists, his words were chillingly simple. Delivered without emotion, this aircraft will never fly. And in that instant, the entire project shifted from suspended innovation to intentional suppression. For once, fear enters the sphere of power, logic and brilliance become expendable, and the political machine moved swiftly, ordering all research halted, all components dismantled, all documents locked away under classified seals. But what they failed to understand was that the aircraft itself had grown beyond the limits of their control, because its very existence inspired curiosity, ambition, and underground whispers among pilots and engineers across various bases, sparking a quiet rebellion of minds hungry for progress. And although the official orders demanded silence, the legend of the aircraft began to spread. described by those who had glimpsed it as a machine capable of vertical climbs never before imagined, capable of gliding silently at altitudes beyond radar detection, capable of maneuvering with a fluidity so alien that it seemed to bend the very air around it. And as rumors grew, the political leadership realized that simply shutting down the project was not enough. They had to bury it so deeply that not even future generations would know it existed. But the lead scientists, anticipating their moves, began hiding pieces of the project in unsuspected locations, coded notes scattered across multiple research facilities, experimental components transferred under the guise of routine shipments, encrypted journals documenting breakthroughs that no government would ever willingly release in doing so. He ensured that the truth behind why the plane never flew would remain shrouded in mystery, forever teetering between fact and conspiracy, leaving historians to wonder whether sabotage, fear, or something even darker was responsible for burying what may have been the most advanced aircraft ever built during the war. A machine that could have redrawn the boundaries of aviation decades before humanity was ready to accept them. And as tensions mounted, as fear escalated, as shadows lengthened around the hangar that once buzzed with the electricity of groundbreaking discovery, the aircraft sat silently in the dark, an unflown titan waiting for a chance that would never come. Its sleek wings gathering dust, while political rivalries and internal paranoia sealed its fate. And as the months dragged on, the scientists who had once dreamed of seeing their creation soar began to feel the crushing weight of despair. For every attempt to push the project forward was met with bureaucratic obstruction, inspections, and veiled threats. And yet, despite the oppressive atmosphere, the lead engineer continued to work in clandestine shifts, poring over blueprints, adjusting control systems, and refining the airframe with obsessive precision, often working late into the night under dim lights, the hum of hidden generators providing a ghostly accompaniment to the almost ritualistic work, because in his mind, the aircraft was not simply a weapon of war, it was proof that humanity could transcend its limitations, that innovation could leap decades ahead of its time, and that a single vision, no matter how suppressed, could challenge the course of history. And as word of the aircraft's impossible capabilities began to leak in whispers among trusted engineers and pilots, speculation ran wild, stories of near-silent flight at impossible altitudes, unmatched acceleration, maneuverability that defied conventional physics, stealth characteristics centuries ahead of contemporary radar, and engines that combine power, efficiency, and thrust in ways that even modern scientists would struggle to replicate. And while the regime dismissed such rumors as fantasy or propaganda, the very existence of these ideas sowed seeds of doubt, fascination, and envy in those who glimpsed its blueprints or managed to see the prototype from a distance. And as political oversight intensified, the aircraft's designers found themselves navigating an ever-tightening web of surveillance, censorship, and paranoia forced to hide breakthroughs in obscure formulas, cryptic engineering notes, and coded schematics, leaving the aircraft's secrets buried within layers of misdirection and intentional obfuscation. But even as the shadow of suppression loomed larger, the prototype itself remained an enigma, a machine of such elegant precision and futuristic design that its very form seemed to radiate defiance. Every curve, every blended wing, every control surface engineered to perform at levels far beyond the capabilities of any contemporaneous aircraft. And while no human would ever sit in its cockpit under powered flight, the world it represented, a world where speed, stealth, and maneuverability could surpass every known limitation, haunted those who worked on it, inspiring awe, obsession, and fear. And the suspense surrounding its existence intensified when Allied intelligence began to pick up fragments of the project's progress. Encrypted communications intercepted and partially decoded, revealing references to a plane beyond comprehension, a machine that the world is not ready for. And though the full details remained shrouded, these fragments ignited imaginations and prompted covert investigations, heightening the sense of both possibility and peril. Because if such a plane ever flew, it would render existing defenses obsolete, and in the minds of both its creators and their superiors, that possibility became the single greatest threat. the invisible force that dictated the project's ultimate fate, and so, with fear as a guiding hand, the aircraft remained grounded, an icon of unrealized potential. Its revolutionary systems powered down but preserved, its secrets hidden within layers of misdirection and secrecy. Leaving the world to wonder, had humanity glimpsed a leap into the future, only to have it stolen away by paranoia, politics, and fear of the unknown. And as decades would pass, historians would sift through archives, piecing together fragments of reports, witness statements, and photographs, attempting to reconstruct the truth of a plane 50 years ahead of its time, never to soar, never to prove its capabilities. Yet its legend would grow ever larger, each retelling dripping with suspense, mystery, and unfulfilled promise, ensuring that the story of the aircraft tides creation, its suppression, and the chilling reasons it never flew is one of the most shocking, enigmatic, and uninspiring chapters in aviation history. And yet, even as the lead scientist's clandestine work persisted, the tension in the hangar became almost unbearable, because every tool, every component, and every blueprint represented not only innovation but potential betrayal, for in the dark corridors of power, rival factions of the regime watched, listened, and schemed, knowing that a machine capable of such revolutionary flight could shift the balance of authority. And with each secret test, each adjustment to control surfaces or propulsion systems, the risk of discovery grew exponentially, the possibility that someone might report the work, or that a single miscalculation could trigger catastrophic failure, keeping the engineers in a state of constant, almost obsessive vigilance. And as the prototype sat on its platform, its sleek fuselage reflecting dim overhead lights, shadows danced across its curved wings, giving the impression of movement, as if the aircraft itself was aware of the forces conspiring against it, anticipating the day it might finally take to the skies. And while the official records would later show no flights, no test runs, and no successful deployment, insiders whispered of secret trials conducted at remote locations, engines ignited just long enough to prove thrust and stability, wing surfaces adjusted under careful supervision, yet always under the cloak of night and secrecy. For any acknowledgement of success would have been intolerable to those in command. And as these whispered tales spread, the mythos of the aircraft began to take on a life of its own, growing with each retelling, each fragment of recollection adding layers of suspense, mystery, and awe, so that decades later, enthusiasts, historians, and engineers would debate not only what the plane was capable of, but what it might have achieved had it ever flown openly. And as they analyzed the surviving notes, sketches, and diagrams, the more they realized that the aircraft anticipated technologies that would not appear in operational aviation until half a century later, including blended wing-body aerodynamics, thrust vectoring, high-efficiency power, and stealth-inspired fuselage shaping, a combination so advanced that it could have revolutionized air warfare, reconnaissance, and aerospace engineering decades ahead of schedule. And yet, despite the brilliance embedded in every panel, rivet, and instrument, the project was systematically dismantled, deconstructed under orders, components reassigned, and documents classified to levels so extreme that even post-war investigations struggled to locate them. And in the minds of the original engineers, this destruction was almost unbearable, a slow, deliberate erasure of their genius and effort. And yet, despite the imposed silence, the aircraft's legend continued to grow, whispered from one generation of aviators to another, becoming a symbol of what might have been, of human ambition, ingenuity, and the terrible consequences when political fear collides with innovation. And as scholars piece together accounts from surviving witnesses, including former technicians, assembly crews, and intelligence officers, they uncovered a narrative filled with suspenseful, near-miraculous achievements that hinted at the plane's unmatched potential, such as prototypes capable of vertical takeoff, advanced aerodynamic testing that predicted future supersonic designs, and experimental engine concepts that anticipated technologies of the late 20th century. Yet all of it remained unrealized, grounded forever by a combination of paranoia, secrecy, and the ruthless exercise of power. And in reflecting on the story, one cannot help but feel the chilling tension of a world on the brink of innovation. A world where a single visionary creation could have altered the course of aviation, yet instead was buried, hidden, and nearly forgotten, leaving a trail of suspense, mystery, and fascination that continues to captivate anyone who dares to uncover the truth behind the aircraft 50 years ahead of its time. A story filled with unfulfilled promise, human obsession, political intrigue, technical brilliance, and a haunting what-if that lingers in the shadowed corridors of history. And as years passed within the chaos of war, the hangar itself became a silent witness to the collision of genius and fear. The echo of footsteps across concrete floors carrying the tension of men working tirelessly in secret, their eyes reflecting both wonder and trepidation as they adjusted control linkages, recalibrated instruments, and examined every aerodynamic surface with obsessive attention, knowing that the slightest misalignment could jeopardize the delicate balance of a machine far ahead of its time. And while the project's progress was meticulously documented in secret notebooks, coded schematics, and encrypted logs, the overarching shadow of political oversight loomed larger with every passing day. For those in power were acutely aware that a fully operational aircraft of this caliber, capable of feats no contemporary plane could match, would append not only military strategies, but the established hierarchy. And the scientists themselves felt the chilling pressure of being custodians of knowledge too powerful to be trusted, yet too revolutionary to ignore, so they continued their work in near-total isolation, under flickering lights and whispered communications, meticulously testing engine prototypes, experimenting with novel wing geometries, and exploring control mechanisms that would later seem almost prophetic, anticipating future stealth concepts, jet thrust innovations, and aerodynamic efficiencies that would not be widely understood for decades. And as the war drew on, the tension heightened. For intelligence officers, foreign spies, and rival scientists occasionally glimpsed fragments of the project, reports that hinted at engines unlike any known, fuselage designs that minimized drag while maximizing lift, and control systems that suggested a level of automation and precision entirely beyond contemporary understanding. And each new revelation sparked both fascination and paranoia, because while some admired the ingenuity, others feared the consequences of such unchecked advancement. And as this interplay of awe and dread intensified, the aircraft itself became a near-mythical object within the hidden corridors of German military research, its presence at once inspiring and terrifying, a silent testament to human creativity tempered by political caution. And as clandestine trials were conducted at remote airstrips under cover of night, the plane occasionally exhibited its astonishing potential, gliding with unmatched stability, responding with uncanny precision to minimal control inputs, demonstrating lift characteristics that no conventional understanding of the era could fully explain, and revealing the terrifying and exhilarating prospect of what might have been had it been allowed to fly openly. Yet even these secret tests were brief, heavily monitored, and ultimately curtailed by the ever-present fear of political repercussions, ensuring that the aircraft remained grounded, its genius confined within hangar walls, and its legacy preserved only in fragmented notes, clandestine photographs, and the whispered recollections of engineers who understood what they had touched but could say nothing. For speaking to freely risked imprisonment or worse, and so the story of the plane grew, layered with suspense, frustration, and fascination, a narrative that has since captivated historians, engineers, and aviation enthusiasts alike, who continue to debate whether the aircraft's suppression was the result of fear, jealousy, sabotage, or a combination of all three. And as modern researchers reconstruct its design from scattered documents, digital simulations, and post-war accounts, the plane's extraordinary features continue to inspire awe: wings shaped for optimal airflow and lift, fuselage designs that anticipated stealth principles, propulsion concepts that combine efficiency with thrust levels decades ahead of its time, and control systems that suggest a sophistication rivaling contemporary fly-by-wire technology, all of which point to an aircraft that could have changed the course of aerial combat and technological development if only it had been permitted to leave the ground. And as each new detail emerges, the suspense intensifies. Because while we can speculate on what might have been, the ultimate fate of the prototype remains shrouded in mystery, the product of political fear, wartime secrecy, and deliberate suppression, leaving historians and enthusiasts alike to grapple with one of the most tantalizing what-ifs in aviation history. A story filled with brilliance, obsession, intrigue, and the haunting tension of a plane 50 years ahead of its time that never, ever flew, yet continues to capture imaginations, challenge assumptions, and inspire a sense of wonder that no other unrealized aircraft has ever matched. Standing as a testament to the fragile line between genius and disaster, ambition and paranoia, invention and suppression, and the breathtaking suspense of a secret that remains partially hidden, still tantalizing, still unexplained, and still, after decades, profoundly compelling. Asterisk, the dawn of a cold, fog-laden morning shrouded the hidden hangar in silence. The kind of silence that carries the weight of history itself. And as the sun's first rays sliced through the mist, illuminating the gleaming fuselage of the impossibly advanced aircraft, a palpable tension gripped everyone present. For the story of the plane that had been 50 years ahead of its time was reaching its climax. A machine whose design had defied every principle of its era now sat before them. Its blended wings and streamlined body catching light in a way that made it seem alive, as if aware of the fate that had befallen it. And for a full minute, every scientist, engineer, and observer held their breath, imagining the miraculous possibilities, envisioning the roar of engines breaking the silence, wings slicing through clouds, and history itself being rewritten in real time. Yet in that suspended moment of awe and anticipation, the cold hand of political authority made itself felt. Officers and officials standing nearby with rigid expressions, their presence a reminder that human fear and paranoia had sealed the aircraft's fate. And as the first engines were tested, humming with a resonance decades ahead of contemporary understanding, the silence of those who had worked in secret seemed almost sacred, their hearts pounding in unison with the vibrations through the hangar floor. And while every instrument control surface, an aerodynamic element was poised to demonstrate the miraculous flight capabilities that had been theorized for decades, the order was given to shut it down, the machine's potential forever deferred. A single command that transformed hope into tragedy. And as the engines quieted, the aircraft seemed to exhale in protest, the sleek metal skin shimmering as if alive, a silent testament to what might have been. And in that moment, the human drama behind the story became as compelling as the technological marvel itself. For the aircraft's suppression had been a product not of engineering limitations, but of fear, politics, and control, a narrative where brilliance collided with authority. Imagination confronted paranoia, and ambition met its most formidable adversary in human nature. And as the scientists looked upon their creation, many years of labor, obsession, and ingenuity now crystallized into a mixture of pride and heartbreak, knowing that this plane, capable of feats the world would not see for decades, had been grounded not by physics, but by circumstance, yet even in its enforced stillness, it radiated a sense of power, inevitability, and suspense, whispering to those who gazed upon it that history had nearly been altered, and in the decades that followed, this story would unfold in hushed conversations, secret archives, and scholarly debates, as historians and engineers pieced together fragments of blueprints, coded journals, photographs, and recollections, revealing the aircraft's staggering capabilities, vertical climb rates that rivaled modern jets, aerodynamic efficiency that anticipated supersonic flight, propulsion systems that suggested decades of advancement, and control systems that presaged fly-by-wire technology of the 21st century, all while the world remained unaware that such a marvel had ever existed. And as each detail emerged, the suspense of what might have been intensified, leaving audiences riveted, imagining the roar, the acceleration, the awe-inspiring sight of a plane that defied its time. And yet the tragedy of its suppression hung over the story like a shadow, because it was not human ingenuity that failed, but human fear and political calculation. And in the telling of this tale, viewers are drawn into a cinematic journey. Picturing the gleaming aircraft and foggy hangars, the tireless scientists working in the dead of night, the powerful engines thrumming with promise, the sleek wings slicing the air in simulation, and the ultimate heartbreaking moment when the order to ground it forever was delivered. A dramatic collision of vision and authority, potential and restriction, science and paranoia, and as the story concludes, the audience is left with a lingering tension, imaging what the skies would have looked like if the plane had flown. How it might have changed aviation, war, and human history, feeling every pulse of suspense. Every vibration of the engines that never roared, every shadow cast across the hangar floor, and understanding that some of the greatest innovations are not remembered for what they did, but for what they were denied the chance to do, a haunting, awe-inspiring.